Okay, welcome back. Sorry about that. Speaking of intercultural, I have friends I've made all around the world. So I just got a call from one of my friends in Chile and wanted to actually make sure that everything was okay with them. They are experiencing lockdowns and lots of other problems as well. So, we still have like quite a bit more to finish. So, I'm going to try and do that. Hang in there with me. And we're going to talk about what I think is kind of the biggest part of intercultural communication, or it's my favorite anyway. Um, our newer comprofs don't like this stuff anymore. They would argue Hofstede's work is out of date, and it is. I'm totally going to give them that. But it's very interesting in academia how we are quick to dismiss something after it gets too far, away, and we come up with new ways of thinking about things, etc., etc. So sometimes we are crazy in our own disciplines. I think this was groundbreaking work. I think it's work that should be replicated. It would be a massive study to replicate, and that's probably the reason why it hasn't been. But I still think it's fascinating and gives us some very, very useful information about intercultural communication, and it's what I was most fascinated with when I was studying it. So probably why I like to teach it. And basically what we're going to look at is the taxonomies. This is Hofstede. It is presented in your chapter. I remember in that little table I told you about, and they present it as cultural as variable. They say very little about it actually, but I think it's so incredibly important, and I think that it does give us a lot of insights into cultures. It's table 18.2 and page 257. So we're going to take a look at the different taxonomies. Some of this I really hope is review, so I'm not going to go on too long about each of these, but hopefully add some new information that you may not have seen even when you took intercultural. So most of you know about Edward Hall. He's all over the comm discipline. We talk about him in nonverbal, we talk about him in intercultural, and probably a few others as well. But he was really impactful in intercultural, and one of the first concepts that comes to us is high context versus low context cultures. And high context cultures, looking at their communication, is very covert, implicit, very internalized. Reactions are reserved. Versus low context cultures, we are much more overt. We say what we want. Our messages are easy to read. We don't hide our expressions or try to confuse. Some of the things I think are interesting is when you get down here, we're highly organized. Time is everything. High context, they're much more open and flexible. They would never say, be there right at 2, you're 2:01, where are you? It wouldn't happen that way. We are low commitment over in the low context, which means we'll blow anything and anyone off. Okay, that didn't come out right. Just, we're very low in the commitment area. And we have fragile interpersonal bonds, which I think is absolutely the case because we are much, much more rigid. So, this one really looked at cultures and whether they're high or low. As I've already alluded, the United States is very low context. And I'll show you the little graph here that gives you some, not all the cultures, but a lot of Asian cultures are much, much more high context and also much, much more reserved. And we have to, think twice about what it is, how they're reacting. I have an interesting picture that kind of explains that. So, the anger picture here, if you can see, in a low context culture, if you're mad or sad, you're sad. You're sad in your head and you're sad frowning. But look at the high context culture. You're sad inside, but what do? You smile. And so certainly, again, punctuality comes into this. And look at even contacts. We have a few contacts. Everyone knows one another on the red, or what would be the high context cultures. So those pictures give you a little bit of an idea about how, and if you've ever looked at lines, low context Q. I've seen this, well, not only in India, but I've seen it down in Latin America a lot, in Guatemala. Everyone just kind of nubs. It's like, oh my gosh, can we please do a line? But that's just not how it works. And that is a very high context way. So, again, American should say US, but this book is old. So, we are very low context. The only culture, I think, lower context than us is German or Scandinavian cultures. And that's very true. If you've been to Germany or had German experiences, I have. A German man remodeled our whole kitchen, and boy, I really learned what low context was, and I think we are low context, or that I'm low context as an American. German took it to a whole nother level of directness. So certainly, this context plays into how we communicate, and it makes it difficult when you are communicating. I have an Indian friend that I talk with in India, and it's very high context. He never really says what he's thinking. And it's so frustrating to me to try to keep asking questions in such a way that I can get inside and try and figure out what he's really trying to say. Very frustrating. All right. The taxonomies, according to Hofstede, start with one I'm sure you're very familiar with, individualism versus collectivism. And this is just the degree to which you rely on the self or the group. A couple of things you may or may not remember is some predictors of that individual or collective behavior in cultures. Economic development. The wealthier you are, the more individualist you can be. And if you have money, you can move away. You can buy a home. You can, I keep waiting. When is the child going to leave? Please. He has no money. If he had money, he'd be out of here. So we definitely see that if you are coming from a wealthier culture or a wealthier environment, you are probably more prone to be individualistic because you can just go buy your own car. You can buy your own house. You don't have to rely on other people for things or services. All right. Also, believe it or not, an interesting predictor is climate. The colder climate you live in, probably the more individualistic you are. So basically, makes sense. If you took nonverbal with me, you learn this. In hotter weather or warmer weather, people come out and they socialize and they do things together and they rely on those connections throughout the year. In colder climates, you don't have that. You have people who are staying indoors or who may not even be able, if you've ever been in a snowstorm or got snowed in. And now look at even this pandemic. It's making us incredibly individualistic because we're all staying inside. We can't count on services or goods or anything from anyone else. So it's just adding to that individualistic mindset. So I don't know if you got to see the actual taxonomies. So here it is. This is Hofstede's research, which I love so much because it's just fascinating. This was done in 1991. So we are officially 30 years old here. And countries have changed as we have progressed in the world. But again, I still think some of this is beneficial. And personally, I just find it interesting to look at. I know current intercultural profs at our school would say Hofstede's research was flawed. I would argue most research is flawed in some way or biased. We try to do the best we can. But again, still interesting. So let's take a look. Who is at the top of the individualism scale? Woohoo! Yeah, it's the USA. We are the most individualistic country in the world. We really rely on the self. And everything, I think we're becoming more individualistic. And you see, these are fairly wealthy countries at the top, kind of big economy players that can provide individualism. What you don't see, you see much warmer countries, poorer countries towards the bottom. I've been to Guatemala, Colombia, Costa Rica, Peru, Vietnam. These are warmer collectivist cultures where they've often relied on family, farming, and the community to help them. And they live within multiple families. We'll talk about that because I want to share a story with you about arranged marriages. Most of you would cringe at that idea, but one of the reasons I went to India was for just that, to understand the notion behind arranged marriages. And you are not getting married and leaving the house, quite the opposite. You're getting married and bringing another family member into the family, because it's a collective mindset. And that's why it's so important that your parents will actually pick your mate, because they're coming to live in the house, and the parents want a say in who gets to live in their house, that they all can get along. So kind of scary, but that's how it works. Power distance. So power distance is the taxonomy that looks at the differences in inequality, status, hierarchical organizational structures, power, if you will, when we're talking about this. And again, power distance is fascinating. Cultures have either a large power distance or a smaller power distance. The larger the power distance, the more inequalities, the more authority and organizational structures. The lower the power distance score, the more equality. Okay, so let's take a look at what that taxonomy would look like. You might be thinking in your mind, where do you think the US is on the power distance taxonomy? Ba-ding, here we are. So we are on the lower power distance, okay, off to the right here, right by Canada. This makes sense. We are not a truly 100% equal culture, but certainly we do have certain rights. We would challenge authority. We have freedoms. We still have different classes in our society, but we are not as bound as some of the countries you're seeing up on the higher side. Even countries, let's see, can I find India on here? India, they have an entire caste system that destines people to an economic and social class. Yes, it's outlawed now, so they say, but it still comes into play. People still look at it. Mexico, some of our Latin American countries over here, very power distance. And that means there's greater inequalities, a lot more rules about who you can and cannot challenge. Speaking of which, you see China high on that as well. In China, children don't challenge their parents, and you certainly would never challenge a teacher or the government. So, large power distance. The other interesting thing about the countries you see towards the bottom here is look at where they are. Switzerland, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Ireland, Denmark. Okay, these are all of your Northern European countries, which when I've had students from Sweden, they're just awesome. They're just like, why do we have to call you doctor? My coach wants me to call him by his, title. Why do I have to do that? And I'm like, whoa. I encourage you, if we do get, I don't know how this will work out in the future, we do get exchange students from Sweden, and it is absolutely fascinating to talk to them because they do not see any of these hierarchies or what we call classes and things that we put in between everyone. We have in the US still a system, a hierarchy of who gets what along the ladder. This is actually one of the reasons I hate when student clubs do like a president, vice president, because you start thinking in a hierarchy and who has what privilege and what power. And I think that's detrimental a lot of times. But a lot of these Northern European cultures, they're also very equitable in terms of men and women. So you see that men and women get paid the same in a Sweden or a Norway or a Finland. And those inequalities just don't exist. And that's why they're so low on the power distance scale. All right, uncertainty avoidance taxonomy. How will cultures adapt to changes and cope with uncertainty? You can think about this. How well does the U.S. cope with change? Do we like change? Do we cope well with uncertainty? Well, you might be saying no, but let's talk about if you have a low uncertainty avoidance, you have a tolerance for ambiguity, you accept, you encourage, dissent, and you want people to try new things and behave in different ways. If you have a higher uncertainty, you don't tolerate going away from the rules. You do not tolerate deviation of cultural members. You have rules, regulations, and traditions. So where is the U.S. on this scale. Da-ding! We have a low uncertainty avoidance over there on the bottom left of your screen. And certainly what that means is we tolerate change quite well. We are having so much of an easier time, believe it or not, with the pandemic than many other countries are going to have. The pandemic is just starting to hit Africa. From what I have seen in footage in South Africa right now, it's somewhat disastrous. Now, you see, South Africa is not really that far away from us. However, I still think because of some of the resources and wealth, that's going to have some issues in South Africa. But we deal with things, we deal with change pretty well. We keep moving along. Let's look at our countries that have a high uncertainty avoidance. They do not like deviation. And you see Greece at the top there. Now, again, remember, 1991, and countries have changed and progressed and regressed. So this was in 91. I see Greece, having been to Greece, totally fits. I know it's way past your generational time, but if you ever saw my big fat Greek wedding, Greeks, tradition, tradition, tradition. They do not like change. I was actually leading study abroad in Greece in 2010 when the austerity measures hit, and there were riots in Syntagma Square. And of course, I said, cool, let's go. So I took all my students to the riots because what? I mean, it's amazing. But the Greek were basically saying, you can't change our pay. You can't take my, you still have mom and pop shops in Greece. Most of them are, even in the major cities. And they open when they feel like it and they close when they want to. And that is the way they've always done things. And they do not deal with change well, which obviously the riots of the austerity measures the same. I've been to Portugal and Guatemala as well up there. And again, they do not deal with change, don't want change, don't want advancements in some regards. You've also got your big block of some communistic kind of countries, if I can say that, over here as well. Russia, very controlling. I mean, look at their behavior still towards LGBTQIA. Did I get that right? That's something that you can still, it is not accepted at all. And so you start to see where a lot of change is not accepted. You're going to get, again, more of your wealthier, larger countries. You're going to start seeing over on the lower uncertainty avoidance because they have the means and the ability to deal with change and advance. Okay, we talked a little bit about masculine and feminine, and this one's tricky because it does include matriarchal, patriarchal, but remember we also looked at it in terms of words associated with masculine and feminine, and we called that this male-female pan 100 cultural adjective list. So a culture is comprised of both. It is comprised of whether or not it's associated with more male or female adjectives, but also partly of what makes a country masculine or feminine is also the equality of males and females and the dominant, kind of masculine, patriarchal notions that exist in the culture. So, where's the U.S.? Ha ha! Bing! We are masculine. We are a fairly masculine culture. And yes, you can argue this was 1991, but I'd say we're still there. And the reason being is if you go back and let's look at these adjectives. We are a very active culture. We are bossy. We are confident, determined, enterprising, and greedy, believe it or not. We are loud and we are obnoxious. Trust me. I know what other cultures think of people in the U.S. And we fit more of the male associated adjectives, and we still have a patriarchal imbalance in the U.S. we still see basically or recognize the male as the head of the family. Great, granted, that is all changing, but it's definitely still part of the society in a lot of ways. Do men make more money than women in the US? Absolutely. All right, let's take a look who is at the bottom of the scale here, the most feminine countries. And I've had the pleasure to visit some. I've been to Chile and Costa Rica, and they're definitely feminine. They're just these wonderful, wonderful, affectionate, charming, sensitive, sexy cultures. Okay, maybe that's just me. I have a thing for, Latino, Hispanic. Okay, we don't need to get into all that. So they're very, very female oriented in their adjectives. However, I would still argue, even Chile and Costa Rica, and they don't have a lot of that machismo, if I can say that I think Mexico has. And you see Mexico much higher on the masculinity side. It's a much, much different vibe in Chile and Costa Rica. And then look at the bottom three. These are, there you go again, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden. I'm going to share with you the Global Economic Impacts Report for Women. Basically, this is a scale they do every single year, and they look at education, opportunity in the job market, longevity of life, and one other thing I'm forgetting right now for women. And it basically says, if you are a female, where is the best place for you to live? And it's always Denmark, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden. The equality there surpasses any other place in the world in terms of male and female. Sweden was one of the first places that started getting rid of or going to gender neutral pronouns. I have articles back from 2000 where preschools in Sweden were already moving away from him and her pronouns. Just very advanced in terms of equality and not presenting really one gender over the other in any way. The last taxonomy is long-term versus short-term. And of course, long-term, you see, admires persistence, traditions, even has a somewhat lengthy relationship with the past. Short-term, yeah, saving face. It's all about me. I don't care if it shames my family or whatever. I'm going to do what I want to do. I've been disowned by my family so many freaking times. It's not even funny. Which you wouldn't see that in other cultures, in longer term cultures. It's not about you. It's about a much longer legacy and interpersonal relationships. So where is the US? You guessed it. We are a short-term culture. We really only care about ourselves. Yay, us. And it makes sense when you look at it. Look what you have cropping up over here on the longer time orientations. Having been to China, absolutely. Everything is a reflection, a time-long reflection of a much, much bigger world. And it's very common. This was common in China. I also saw this a lot in Thailand and Vietnam in particular, where the living room or the parlor was decorated with pictures of ancestors all the way around. This was our fourth great father of the China blah blah revolution, or something, and it was like, it's literally an altar to the past, and everything you do reflects every single person on that wall, and just how they see time as a much longer and all-enduring enterprise. And of course, we do not. So those are Hofstede's dimensions. Like I said, I understand his research was done 30 years ago, but I certainly think that these differences or these taxonomies go through all cultures. Interestingly enough, there was a research article came out recently that looked at what they believe might be another taxonomy that runs through all cultures. And that taxonomy was basically one they want to call social norms and rule breaking. And I think they're trying to differentiate it from power distance, but I think it looks at rule breaking or more social norms at a not an official level, but let's say unofficial level. So, how deviant are you as a culture? If I had to place the US on that scale, I'd say we're a pretty deviant culture. I think if we can get away with it, we'll try it. So, at any rate, those are the taxonomies. Okay, we have one more to talk about, and that is the model of intercultural praxis. And it is, hold the phone right here. I, being the incredibly prepared and organized person that I am, took a picture of this out of the book and put it up here. I suppose, normally, I might have actually made a PowerPoint. What's happening? Here it is. Sorry, guys. I might have made a PowerPoint of it, and I hope I'm still recording because all kinds of weird stuff is popping up on the screen right now. So we'll just try and go with it. All right, this is. Let me give you some reference for where this comes from. We started with the notion of just being a competent intercultural communicator, and there was what they called the basic, which was kind of like 12 things to help you be more competent when you communicate or interact with other cultures. That has been largely replaced now by this intercultural praxis model, and it kind of fits with where I think our school and the people who wrote this chapter feel intercultural should be practiced. I want to say it even comes along with a big focus on mindfulness. And certainly, again, the chapter is written by those who take a big stake in being mindful. So let's just go through each part here. Inquiry is really where it starts. I have always had an inquiry for other cultures. I would say it also even started with religion and being very curious about other religions. And if my book about my travels ever gets published, you'll be able to read about all my weird fascinations. And my parents just had a hell of a time with me growing up because they didn't know what to do with me. And they were very strict and conservative. And, I really wasn't. I was curious and I wanted to learn. That was what's most important to me. And I was willing to suspend, judgment. I wanted to just go find out. And that's been a driving force in my whole life. When we have that courage to go and curiosity to go inquire, and not everyone does. I should stress that because in leadership, when I walk around and have you talk about your values, some of you are like, nope, I don't need to go anywhere. I don't want to. I'm good with knowing what I know and being right where I am. That just doesn't work for me. It works for my mom, my dad, and my sister. They like to stay in their world. And I don't know why I got the curiosity bug, but I have to learn about everything I possibly can because it frames the way I think about the world. I like to be aware of different ways of thinking and to be able to shift those perspectives. And that's what we mean by framing. And when we can shift a perspective or frame something in a certain way, it leads to a totally different socially constructed viewpoint. So let me go back to arranged marriage. So I did a trip to India and I was very interested in talking to people about frame marriage or arranged marriage. And that was the inquiry or the curiosity. The framing was interesting because in their perspective, marriage, again, it's not about love at all. It's not. And they explained it to me. Your best hope to make it through life for survival, for your longevity and survival is to have a mate that will help you through that best fits you and best fits the family. Now, it is changing in places like India and even Pakistan and some other, even China, who were traditionally arranging marriages. You see this in highly collective cultures because, as I said, you were picking someone to join the family. So the whole family had to get along with them. Because of resources and wealth, money, economic issues, generally everyone lived in one house. So marriage became framed as something that you do because you need someone to help you and your family get through this life and then provide, children to take care of the next generation. And framed like that, it's like totally makes sense. We have framed it completely differently. We have framed it with Disney and Cinderella and being swept off our feet. And quite frankly, a lot of people in arranged marriages, it's a very practical way of love. We have framed it completely different, which has led to positioning of marriage different in our culture. We have socially constructed it in a completely different way. It impacts how we make sense of relationships completely. I mean, it changes everything, and how we dialogue about it and how we talk about marriage. I read Medium a lot. If you don't know what Medium is, it's a kind of a think tank. I don't know, maybe one of you can describe it to me. And they were saying 5 things in your life not worth it. And one of them that the person points out writing the article is a big wedding, spending lots of money on a big wedding. How we have positioned this in our culture to mean everything. We dialogue about getting married from the earliest of ages. And yet we see these lavish affairs thrown for this one day. And it's not really, yeah, it's very interesting. Think about that. And with a 50% divorce rate, again, remember when we did that in class and I said, how many of you are going to get married? How many of you expect to be divorced? And it didn't add up. It's very interesting to ask why we would continue to do that. But from the time we were little, it's been framed differently. We've socially created and positioned a different reality, and we've dialogued and thought about it in different ways. So yeah, if you were to ask me now, going back, I almost think an arranged marriage would have been good for me. And that's the reflection. Are there good things about arranged marriages? I actually think so. Is life about this high we get from love or whatever, or is life about making the best we can for the people in it, around us, related to us, for survival and health? It's just very interesting. And then we take action. Hopefully action is changing our stereotypes, our prejudices, our inequalities. Hopefully we become more compassionate and peaceful as we reflect on these things. So I do think this deals with mindfulness as we look to other cultures and other ways of doing things, and how can we frame it differently. I think we're finally starting to do that in the US when it comes to success and wealth. We are taking a little bit different framing. Because what we find out is a meta-analysis study that was done that says what is most important to your longevity. Believe it or not, it is your social relationships and communication within them. The better your social relationships, your interpersonal relationships, and the more you have, the longer you will live. That's the most important thing. So hopefully that causes a different dialogue to open up, a different position and reflection. This model can be used in many, many ways, and I think it's quite profound. I wanted to give you one other example. One of the things I also went to India for was Sikhism, because I'm fascinated by religion, and they just had a very different perspective on religion. God can pretty much be whatever you want God to be, and men and women are seen as completely equal. And I was like, wow, man, this is good stuff. And it was fascinating what I saw, but I can tell the difference between Sikhs do wear turbans. And if you see a Sikh wrapped turban, I can just tell you right now, that person is your friend. They will help you. They are loyal. They are some of the most forgiving and gracious people I have ever met. But we have to go through this process sometimes to learn, to have the curiosity to say, I want to learn about it. And there are, I was trying to think, because it was like a famous movie where someone was like, I don't want to know about it. Oh, that's what it was. It was Remember the Titans when I showed it in leadership. The mom doesn't want to hear about his African American friend. She doesn't want to know about those people. And we have to go through this process or we can't come to a way of thinking about the world differently, and we will probably only divide it more. So I'm hoping this all still recorded because some weird stuff happened on my laptop, but I am finally done talking about intercultural. I wish I could tell you many more travel stories and experiences, but I will stop for now. Your next paper is on intercultural. If you can apply it in ways that don't include COVID-19, that'd be super neat because I think everyone, again, wrote their persuasion paper on the coronavirus. But obviously, culturally, this applies to what's going on right now as well. So it's up to you. I moved the paper back from the original date on the syllabus because it's not enough time. So it'll be due on Monday, and you got that in the email. You do need to finish the 2 intercultural videos and the reading quiz by Thursday the 9th. And then next week, I believe we jump into health communication. So if we cannot talk that much about the virus this week, we'll come back and talk about it next week. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed a little bit of intercultural, and if there's anything I talked about or touched on that you would like more information about, whether it's a family tree or information about taxonomies or cultural identity, certainly I can do any of that for you. All right, I think we got it. So I'm hoping I can find where the record thing is and turn this off, or I'm going to freak out. There it is. Bye.